In a place where dust clings not only to the skin, but to memory. Where the heat doesn't just dry the grass, but tears hope apart. A story unfolded, quietly. Unexpectedly. There was no blood. No roar. Only a mother elephant named Luma. And a male elephant, Kavi. One no one was waiting for, but who chose to stay. He didn't lead. He didn't roar. He didn't fight for dominance. He just stood there. And through his very presence, he saved them all. People say, he never needed to be asked. He only needed to be trusted. This is the story of a guardian without a throne. Of a strength, not found in muscle, but in silence. This is Kavi. The heat didn't scream like fire, it smoldered like an old burn. By the end of the third consecutive dry season in the Samburu Reserve, the earth cracked open like the fissures on the skin of a dying giant. Each heavy step of the elephant herd stirred red dust into the air like the earth's final breath. The waterhole lay bone dry, exposing white rings of mud like salt rubbed into the memory of monsoons past. In this air thick with light and silence, a miracle was quietly taking shape. Her name was Luma, a 30-year-old matriarch elephant, modest in stature, but with eyes that had stared through fire. Luma never had to roar to command respect. She didn't lead by brute strength, but by a calm that never unraveled. For 3 brutal years of drought, Luma had guided her herd through scorched sands, through burnt forests, through the bullets of poachers, and not a single calf of hers had been lost. But this time, even the wind carried a warning. Her belly hung low, swelling as if she bore an entire sky about to collapse. Each step grew slower, more still, as if she were listening to the whispers of the earth. The young elephants instinctively slowed down when they saw Luma pause, not out of fear, but because instinct had taught them. When Luma is silent, the earth is saying something. From afar, a research team from the Institute of Animal Behavior had been tracking the herd for over 6 months. They had named each individual, documented every behavior, from the way they drank water to how often they blinked while resting. But Luma didn't fit into any of their data models. She didn't repeat behaviors. She chose. And now, with her belly nearly dragging against the earth, they knew the moment was approaching. What they didn't know was, it would change everything. That morning, sunlight didn't shine down, it crawled, as if even the sky was wary of what was about to happen. Just as the sun peaked above the horizon, Luma left the herd. There was no call, no signal, no warning gesture. She simply turned away from the dusty area where the other elephants were still searching for water, and walked toward the eastern acacia grove, a place long abandoned by her kind. Once a refuge for hyenas, for elephant carcasses, for memories no one dared retell. She chose that place. The researchers, stunned, hurried to follow. They switched off their radios, pulled out their binoculars, and crept silently through the underbrush. Their footsteps made no sound, but their hearts began beating differently, faster, then slower, then seeming to stop altogether when Luma knelt down, then lay on her side, belly stretched as if ready to burst. The air seemed vacuumed clean. And then, life broke forth. The first calf slid to the ground like a bundle of light mixed with blood and dust. It was still wet, fragile, but already reaching its trunk toward its mother's leg. A researcher whispered, barely breathing, "Healthy, it's already standing." Just minutes later, another sound, heavier, more urgent. A second calf, also alive, also writhing, also searching for its mother. Someone murmured, "Twins? Oh my God, they're twins." But Luma still didn't get up. She groaned, a rough, urgent sound, as if she was holding back a storm in her lungs. Her body trembled, stretched, and then, once more, she breathed out life. The third. 3 cries. 3 lives. A miracle. None of the team had ever witnessed triplets before. Across the entire African continent, fewer than 10 cases have ever been recorded. All of them ended with at least one calf dying within 24 hours. But now, right before their eyes, 3 fragile lives were shivering, bumping into each other, wrapping their trunks around their mother's legs, searching for life. And Luma lay motionless. Her breath was heavy as stone, each inhale a battle. Her trunk moved only slightly, just enough to touch the first calf. Then fell, like a leaf after the storm. The researchers gripped their radios. One raised her hand to press the button, to call for help. for a vehicle, for emergency assistance. But her hand was gently stopped by another. Wait, not yet. Because they were witnessing something no data could predict. A triple birth in a land of death. And a greater question. Who would come? And then, from the distance, dust began to rise again. A giant black figure was approaching. Not hurried, not chaotic, just returning. He arrived without a roar. No warning signs, no angry sounds of a bull elephant defending his territory. Only dust rising from afar. A soft breeze pushed back by the footsteps of a figure both familiar and foreign. Kavi. No one on the research team had seen him for weeks. Male elephants, after mating, typically retreat into deep wilderness to live in solitude. They are seen as kings without thrones, powerful, but wandering, rootless. But Kavi wasn't wandering. He was returning, and he knew exactly who he was returning to. Luma was still lying there. Her 3 calves wobbling around her body like stars around a dying planet. Her trunk weakly reached upward, as if trying to touch something invisible, or waiting for someone to cross the boundary between doubt and presence. And then, her trunk touched his leg. Kavi didn't stop. He didn't turn to the humans. Didn't seek water. Didn't roar. He simply walked to Luma and stood there. The 3 calves, bewildered and scared, gathered at his feet. They didn't yet know what a father was, much less that this towering figure bowing before them was the one who had planted the seed of life in their mother during last year's mating season. But Kavi knew. He knelt, an act nearly unheard of in any recorded behavioral study. A fully grown, dominant bull elephant, kneeling beside 3 newborn calves. And then, with his massive trunk, marked by dust, by time, by old battles, Kavi touched each calf with tenderness. One touch on the forehead, one on the back, one on the tail, not to mark territory, not to assert dominance, but as if to speak in a language only beings who carry the memory of the earth could understand. I am your father. I see you. Behind the shrubs, the research team did not take photos. They didn't dare, not out of fear of disturbing the moment, but because they felt as though they were witnessing a sacred rite. A ritual not meant for cameras, but meant to be witnessed with the heart. As the sun climbed higher, shadows withdrew from the earth like mercy slowly fading away. Dust clung thick on Luma's back, on her half-closed eyelids, and on the 3 calves staggering between unnamed life and death. Kavi stood up, not hurried, not alarmed. He began moving in wide circles around Luma, each step imprinting an ancient resolve that this land, this moment, was sacred, and any being who entered uninvited would face him. The research team, in absolute silence, watched through their lenses. From above, if someone were mapping the scene, they would see Kavi drawing a perimeter with his steps, not with claws. Not with roars, but with strategy. Not long after, a threat emerged. A lone hyena crept in from the edge of the forest, drawn by the scent of blood, of afterbirth, and the still body of a mother elephant. Its pointed head recoiled slightly at the sight of the massive figure stepping out from the brush. Its eyes blinked, but its feet still advanced. Kavi stopped. He didn't roar. He didn't lower his tusks. He simply walked straight toward the hyena, his steps thunderous, each footfall making the earth tremble lightly, like a warning from the ground itself. You are not allowed here. The hyena hesitated, growled, wavered, but then it realized, this elephant was not alone. He carried the will of 3 lives that had only just begun. It fled. No applause. No praise. Only the sound of 3 shallow breaths. 3 small bodies pressed together beneath their mother's shadow. And a bull elephant returning to his circle. Continuing his path. Continuing his vigil. He did not roar, yet the entire land seemed to hear him. Midday. The sunlight didn't just burn the skin, it scorched hope. Luma still lay there, breathing heavily, her clouded eyes fluttering between life and fading. The 3 calves wandered around their mother's body, huddled together, occasionally letting out weak cries, as if calling for a kind of protection they had never known by name. Kavi stepped closer. He no longer walked in circles. He stood beside Luma, bent down, and gently nudged her side with his tusk, not hard, not painful, just a nudge of hope. But Luma couldn't rise. Her legs trembled as if they had melted into the arid heat. Behind the bushes, a researcher murmured, "She's dehydrated. She needs water. Otherwise, She won't make it. Another had already lifted their hand to the radio, lips ready to say the word, intervention. But before the call was made, Kavi did something no one expected. He turned away from Luma, walked to the very spot where she had dug a shallow trench to rest. He stood there for a few seconds, as if listening to the earth breathe, then began to dig. Not by instinct but by will. With his trunk, with his tusks, with the strength of one who does not need to roar to silence a crowd. Each strike, each thrust, each scoop of dust rose like incense in a primordial ritual. No one spoke, no one moved, even the flies seemed to pause their buzzing. And then, water appeared. Just a thin trickle, dark, damp, but it was life. Kavi scooped the water with his trunk. He didn't drink. He didn't pour it on the ground. He returned to Luma, and sprayed the water onto her body, cool streams flowing from her forehead to her belly. From her cracked lips to her parched skin. Luma's eyes opened slightly. Her eyelids fluttered. Her trunk rose, reaching for the stream coming not from a pond, not from a trough, but from Kavi. She drank, not from the earth, but from him. No researcher pressed a shutter. No photo was taken. Only silence remained, sacred, heavy, and full of reverence. One person gently touched the shoulder of a colleague holding the radio. "No, don't break this. They don't need us." And they were right. Kavi, a bull elephant, a once lonely wanderer, had just saved the mother of his 3 children. Not with violence, but with water, with grace, with presence. Night fell like a parched blanket over the land and sky, not cool, not gentle, just a change of light that carried no forgiveness. Luma drifted off, not because she had recovered, but because she was depleted. She slept with shallow breaths, each one as faint as the last waves lapping at the shore. Kavi did not sleep. He stood there, motionless like a living pillar of stone, surrounded by the sounds of insects. The fluttering wings of flies drawn by the scent of birthing blood. They poured in like a living rain, swarming Luma's body and the 3 calves still dazed in their exhausted slumber. Luma stirred gently. She tried to raise her trunk to brush the insects from her eyes. But she had no strength. Her trunk dropped like a broken branch. Kavi stepped forward. He spread his ears, those thick, leathery fans, rough at the edges, once torn in battle. But now, they were not for intimidation. They were to shield her eyes, her mouth, her cracked feet. He stood in line with the sun, taking in the last heat of the day, so it wouldn't touch her. He was not a shadow. He was the very shelter she could rest in. One of the calves stirred, trying to flap its ears like its father. Its tiny, clumsy ears only managed to swat itself. It squeaked faintly, as if frustrated by its still unformed body. Kavi lowered his head. No scolding, no trumpeting. He taught. He lifted one foot, then placed it down right beside the calf, slowly. Like a sign, a rhythm. The calf looked up, then lifted its foot, then wobbled, then fell flat onto its rear. But it understood. From a distance, Dr. Rena whispered into her recorder. "He's teaching. He's not protecting. He's teaching." Kavi needed no words. He used the very form of his massive body to say, "I will shield. I will teach. I will stand, instead of run." That night, the wind began to change direction. Another swarm of flies approached, but then turned back, as if the scent of something far greater had frightened them away. Not the smell of blood, not the smell of flesh, but the smell of presence. As the sun rose just above the withered acacia trees, Luma stirred, not forcefully, not urgently, just enough of a movement for the dust on her back to lift. Like the first breath after a long delirium, she touched her trunk to Kavi, as if to ask, "Are you still here?" And he hadn't moved an inch. The 3 calves, now less shaky, were nestling under their mother's belly, seeking milk, seeking warmth, seeking a heartbeat they had never heard but somehow still knew to trust. Luma looked at each of them, her trunk gently touching their foreheads, their backs, then curling softly, as if to embrace them without using strength. From afar, a sound rang out, a deep, low trumpet, then dust swirled at the horizon. The researchers turned their lenses and exhaled softly. The herd was returning. 2 large figures appeared first. An older female elephant with a long scar running down her left shoulder. And a younger male, Luma's firstborn son. They approached slowly, cautiously, as if understanding they were stepping into sacred ground, now guarded by someone else. When they drew near, the older female paused beside Kavi. There was no trumpeting, no tusk contact, only a bow of her head, her forehead pressed gently to his flank. And she stood still, an ancient ritual that required no words, an act of recognition and the passing of guardianship. The researchers said nothing, but in their eyes, they knew. This wasn't just a male behaving unusually. This was an individual being accepted as a sentinel, a being standing between life and darkness. The three calves, still unsteady on their feet, began mimicking each other. One stepped forward, another followed, one strayed off, then turned back. And each time they stumbled, Kavi was there, not always to catch them, but always to wait. He chose presence over instinct. He chose to observe over impose. He chose to teach instead of control. That morning, in the first light of day, amid the red dust and reborn life, the herd encircled Luma in a ring of protection, with Kavi at its silent center. The wind shifted like a whispered signal. And that day, the sun no longer blazed as it had before. It stood still overhead, watching the scene in transformation. Luma shook off a clump of dry dust from her back as she tried to gently sway her body. One front leg stretched forward, trembling violently. The aged muscles that had once led the herd through parched lands were no longer steady. But she kept trying. She braced her hind legs. A deep groan escaped her throat. A coarse yet profound sound, like the creaking of an old door opening after a storm. The researchers held their breath. The three calves jumped back, both curious and frightened. They had never seen their mother this tall before. And then, Luma stood, not steady, not graceful, but she stood, a heavy, gray-brown figure, trembling, yet still the spine of this entire story. Kavi quietly stepped back a pace, not to assist, not to support, just to make space. He stood in the shadows, behind her, but his eyes, had anyone been close enough to see, were burning like sunlight on a dry day. The three calves ran toward their mother, bumping into her legs, stumbling, then rising again. Luma let out a low rumble, not loud, but clear. Each rumble was a name. Each name was a call. They listened, understood, and answered. But the most remarkable thing wasn't that Luma had stood up. It was what happened next. The three calves, after touching their mother, turned back toward Kavi, not seeking comfort, but seeking balance. One nestled against his leg. Another pressed its forehead to his belly. The third just stood nearby, no contact. Just watching. It wasn't fear anymore. It was recognition. That, he is here, and he will still be here. As the sun reached its peak, the herd began moving westward, toward higher ground, where there was more shade, more grass, and more hope for the calves' survival. Luma led the way. The others followed. But Kavi did not. He remained at the edge of the acacia thicket, the very place of birth. A place now marked with more than any book could ever record. He just watched. And when the youngest calf turned back, it didn't cry. It didn't trumpet. It just took a few steps back, pressed its forehead to his leg, and stood still, as if to say, I see you. I know you were here. Then it turned, and ran after its mother. And Kavi began to bury the watering hole he had once dug. Each sweep of his trunk, slow, steady, covered the scent of blood, the footprints, and the memories, not to erase them, but to protect them, to say, this chapter, I have completed. The wind had stopped blowing. The sun no longer scorched. But the earth remained cracked, preserving every trace of the moment just past, as if nature itself wanted to hold on to something sacred that had just happened. Kavi stood still, at the very place where the last footprints of Luma and her three calves had been. From there, he could see the herd shrinking in the distance, gray silhouettes fading in the shimmering light, blending into the dust, melting into the silence like the final breath of an ancient song. But he did not follow. No steps taken, no trumpet call, no pleading, only stillness, like a farewell spoken without words. At the forest's edge, Kavi lowered his head to the earth. Right there, just meters from where Luma had once lain, was the watering hole he had carved out with his tusks and will. The place where, for the first time ever recorded, A bull elephant had brought life not through dominance, but through sacrifice. His trunk moved gently. The soil was pushed back, bit by bit, like a master potter quietly sealing a sacred secret. With patience and reverence, no one dared interrupt the moment. The research team stood frozen, as if spellbound. One lifted her camera. Another gently touched her hand and shook his head. No, this isn't to be captured. This is to be witnessed. And then, when every trace had been covered, Kavi lifted his head one final time. Not toward the herd, but toward the sky, as if to say, they are safe. She lived, and I was here. The next morning, he was gone. No sound, no new tracks, only the acacia grove, quieter than any morning before. Kavi did not die. He was not injured. He simply left. Into the forest where no camera had ever followed. Into memories no one knew how to write down. Into legend. Kavi did not return to the herd. Nor did he go back to the old mating grounds, where bull elephants usually roar, clash, and stake their dominance with scars and sound. He went the other way. Up into the rocky highlands above the valley, where there was only wind, shade, and a panoramic view of the path Luma and her calves had taken. And there he stood, not grazing, not resting, just standing. From the distant observation post, the researchers watched him through binoculars. No one said a word. Dr. Rena scribbled a quick note in her journal. He's not guarding. He's saying goodbye. 3 days passed. No one saw him eat. No one saw him lie down. Only his presence, a living monument, stood amidst wind and stone, in a place where no beings dwelled, but where the spirit of something sacred lingered. Then something happened. 2 days after the herd's departure, a wild pack of hyenas appeared at the acacia grove, the very place where Luma had given birth. Perhaps drawn by the lingering scent of blood in the soil, they came, 6, then 8, creeping through the brush, digging through the past with their teeth and claws. But Kavi had returned. No words, no sound. He did not charge. He did not roar. He did not attack. He moved, with intention, with precision. He blocked paths, split the hyenas apart, herded them into confusion, not through brute force, but through understanding of the terrain and ancestral instinct. In 30 minutes, not a single wound. Not one hyena killed. But they fled, panicked, disoriented, and never came back. And when the dust settled, when all that remained was him and the land filled with memory, Kavi returned to the old watering hole, the one he had once carved with will and tusk. This time, he leveled it completely, not just to cover, but to close. Each gentle push of his trunk was like writing on the soil. This chapter is done. There is nothing left to search for. And then, he turned away. No one knows where he went. No further tracks were ever recorded. But from that day forward, that acacia grove was no longer just another place. It became sacred ground, a place where people no longer entered, only watched from afar, and remained silent. No one saw Kavi after that day. No one heard his trumpet echo through the valley. There was no body, no trail, no proof he was alive. Only stories remained. At the Samburu ranger station, a mural was painted on the wall. A massive bull elephant, standing silently among 3 calves, beneath a sky full of stars. No battle, no roar, only presence. A little girl, around 8, daughter of the cook who once worked at the old station, pointed to the mural and said, "That's the elephant who guarded the baby elephants." And that, she whispered, that is real strength. The teacher beside her didn't correct her. She simply nodded, then turned to the class. Today, we draw what strength means to each of you. That afternoon, 15 children drew Kavi. No crowns, no tusks, no battles. They drew him standing. One drew his ears stretched wide, shading like a tree canopy. Another drew him bowing, teaching a calf how to stand. One drew his shadow, long and soft, blanketing fear like a warm quilt. Not one child drew him roaring. Not one child drew him fighting. All of them drew stillness. At a university halfway across the world, Kavi's story was taught, not in biology, but in ethics. A professor showed rare footage. Kavi kneeling beside the calves, digging the waterhole, shading Luma from heat and flies. Then he turned to the class and asked, if these acts came from a human, we'd call it leadership. But because it came from an elephant, Do we still recognize it? The room fell silent, until one student whispered, "That's the kind of leadership we need more of." At a small medical clinic in the Kenyan highlands, a young painter depicted 3 blooming trees, each tree for a calf. Above them, a massive trunk arched like the sky, sheltering them. At an orphanage, Kavi's story was told every night, as the tale of a father who never left, even if he was never really there. And in the forests of Samburu, Luma's herd returned each year. No guide, no path. They circled the acacia grove, touched trunks to an old hollow in the ground now covered in moss. No names, no markers, only a small stone, carved with the words, "He stood." Kavi didn't die. He became a living memory. An archetype. A reminder that there are some who, even when no one asks, stay, stand guard, and leave a legacy. Through presence. 15 years passed like a quiet layer of dust settling over memory, but never erasing it. The acacia grove where Luma once gave birth to her 3 calves had changed. The ancient tree that once cast shade over her frail body now spread its canopy wide. A resilient, domed shelter. Its twisted roots gripped the earth tightly, encircling a shallow hollow, the very spot where Kavi once dug for water with his trunk and tusks. People called it Kavi's bowl, though never full. Strangely, it never dried, even in the harshest dry seasons. Thin veins of water shimmered like the earth's own tears, as if the soil itself remembered something sacred. Luma had passed away, a peaceful death. No blood, no poachers. She simply lay down beneath the tree, when her role was complete, and never rose again. Her 3 calves, now grown into full elephants, returned every year. No reminders, no instructions. They walked together, silently, circling the acacia, touching trunks to the softened earth, then pausing, as if to listen. One of the 3, the one with a gently curved right tusk, just like his father's, now had a calf of his own. And what moved the researchers to silence was this. Whenever that calf was afraid, it didn't run to the center of the herd. It stepped outside, stood alone, and turned its head, as if waiting for someone to stand behind it. Even though no one came. Just a gentle emptiness, yet somehow, so full. At the new observation post, the next generation of researchers still passed around the old journal. Faded, frayed at the spine, where Dr. Rena once wrote. Day 2. Kavi shielded Luma with his body for 4 hours. Only left to drink, then returned. The calves followed his silhouette like a shadow. The wind stopped. Time ceased to exist. Another line, written in bold at the very front page. He didn't just protect. He allowed others to be fragile in a world too vast. And sometimes, just standing there was enough. Each dry season, when mist still clings to the forest peaks of Samburu, some say they still see a large shape in the far distance. Not a bush, not a boulder, a shadow, standing still, not approaching, not returning, just standing. And people understand, Kavi no longer belongs to flesh. He belongs to gesture, to children who know how to shelter one another, to young elephants who wait for each other, to guardians who need no title. Kavi was never a king, never the largest, never the loudest. But in every heart that's heard his story, he is the very definition of presence. Silent and unforgettable. Kavi was never a king. He wore no crown. He led no herd. He ruled over nothing. But in the memory of those who witnessed him, he was the very definition of presence. A presence, quiet enough not to frighten anyone, yet vast enough that all fell silent when he walked near. Not out of fear, but out of reverence. He never roared, yet the whole valley fell still. And even now, when no one sees his shadow anymore, people still speak of the elephant, who shielded the mother of his children from the sun, who taught through action, and who chose to stay when no one asked him to. Some lead through words, but legends are written in silence. If this story touched you, share it, so that those who stand quietly in this world, holding firm without praise, may know they are seen, too. And never forget, sometimes, just standing there is enough.